It took the flip of a switch and the turn of a dial more than 50 years ago for television to become an unforgettable part of local culture.
Hi, may I wish you a perfectly beautiful day, another in a long string of lovely days.
Hi, everybody. Top of the evening to you. Here's one for the books.
This is the high-pressure system that dropped down behind the cold front that came through yesterday morning.
Those bold brains at the university who kicked me out years ago shall regret the words they spoke against me. They said I was a nut.
Now, the obvious question immediately presents itself: why? Why did this happen?
The 3-dog night and joy to the world.
Jeremiah was the bullfrog.
I'm Bob.
And I'm Jan, and we're the Cars.
Both legally and happily.
And in just a moment, I'll be back with more news.
Ask any New Orleans baby boomer to recall their favorite shows and stars, and the answers are much the same. The memories of local TV shows and stars remain vivid, even if most of what we saw was black and white. In fact, some of the earliest memories are of a rather simple but memorable offering.
I would wait for the test pattern to come on TV. I'd wait for an hour. I'd watch it on Saturday mornings. Just watch the test pattern, which had black, iron lace gratings. It had Jackson Square. It was a beautiful piece of art. It really was. It was so distinctive.
The test pattern might be distinctive, but for New Orleans kids, there was fortunately much more to watch. In the early 50s, the hottest ticket in town for the younger set was an invitation to the show hosted on Channel 6 by Mrs. Muffin.
Some people say, I remember she was Miss Muffin. Oh no, she was Mrs. Muffin. She wore a wedding ring, she was married, you know, it was very wholesome. Everything was very wholesome back then.
Oh, of course, Mrs. Muffin. Mrs. Muffin was the warm lady who baked cookies, and her hair was in a bun, and she had birthday parties for the children.
It started once a week. It was first Mrs. Muffin's birthday party, then the surprise party, and then something else party. And then we did a Saturday morning Mrs. Muffin program, Mrs. Muffin's Magic Cottage. It just kind of grew and grew and grew.
Terry Fletridge actually began her local broadcasting career in radio on WWL. Like Fletridge, another radio personality crossed over into television with kids. Henry Dupre was well known as a member of the Dawn Busters troupe on WWL radio. When Channel 4 hit the air, Dupre's broadcasting talents helped him make a smooth transition and earned him a place in TV history and our TV family as an uncle, Uncle Henry on Popeye and Pals. Years before he became an entertainment critic, Al Shea starred as Deputy Oops, and his Channel 6 co-star literally lit up the screen.
And I had rigged up this light, just a bulb, a light bulb. I believe that base was an old lamp, and a metal lamp to a paddle that he had rigged up. And I would talk to Deputy Oops, and I would move my foot, standing up, and you didn't see my foot, and he would answer back. It would go when it lit.
America's fascination with outer space helped inspire another local children's show. In 1961, Channel 4 staff announcer John Pila starred as Captain Mercury.
And Captain Mercury was going to be the first guy to land on the moon. And he did it every day with this little spaceship and about 7 of our little astronauts, the little kids dressed up with the little gear.
It wasn't space, but the silver screen that influenced a very popular local kid show from 1959 until 1965. Wayne Mack moved from being a staff announcer at Channel 6 to starring as the Great McNutt.
You know, lights, camera, action, start the cotton picking program.
The fellow who was doing the kid show spent too much time drinking martinis across the street. And so they fired him, and they asked me if I could do a kid show, and I said, yeah, I thought I could. I'd been watching him, and I thought I could do it better sober than he did loaded.
The premise was he was a movie director, and he would sit in a studio chair, and then when each kid would come in and he would announce them, like, here's Mary Smith, and he never faulted, would have something funny and charming to say to the kids.
In the 1960s, a popular kid show host helped make a name for the city's newest station, WJMR, which later became WVUE. Johnny Miller hosted Johnny's Follies and entertained the in-studio and at-home audience with his brand of music and fun. Another simple yet popular children's program, Let's Tell a Story, ran on Channel 6 for decades. The show was produced by the local chapter of the National Council of Jewish Women.
Huge storybook set, and the storybook opens, and a little elf, wakes up and yawns and sits on a tree stump and gets up and notices the audience. It's almost like the song out of Gypsy. And then I spot the audience. The elf notices the audience and starts doing a little dance and introduces the storyteller.
Hello, boys and girls. If you'll give me a look, you'll know right away that I am a cook.
It was a 15-minute story. And it was in the days when they had 5-minute shows, 15-minute shows, half-an-hour shows. This was 15 minutes, and it was all memorized.
For Linda Mintz, Let's Tell a Story was just the first chapter in local children's TV.
Happy Jack says it's time for the Romper Room School, and time for us to sing Mr. Doobie's special song and talk about our Doobie reminder. Let's drop...
In the early 1970s, she became one of the city's favorite school teachers on Romper Room. But Miss Linda actually took over the role from Miss Ginny Hostetler. She hosted an earlier version of Romper Room on WWL. There, the feel and format were much the same.
It was a nursery school with 6 children, and it was the object of the show, in my opinion, was to prepare children for big school. So we had physical fitness, we had reading readiness, preparation for the things that they would need to know when they went to big school, and it was also an attempt on my part to erase any fears that children might have about going to big school.
Earning a spot on Romper Room required writing a letter to Miss Linda. But through the magic of television, even those boys and girls who didn't appear on the show had a special connection.
This is the magic mirror. We closed every single show with the magic mirror.
Romper, romper, scamper, boo. Tell me, do. Magic mirror, tell me today. My friends at home have fun at play. I see O'Neill, Amir, and Scott, and Lisa. I see Isaac, and Etta, and Nicole, and Jan. There are Ralphie and Frank Peter. Hi, Mike and Harold. I see Betsy and Craig, and Jake, and Debbie, and Ann. And all my doobies, I see you too. I'll see you Monday morning right here in the Romper Room School. Bye now.
One New Orleans television station was designed almost specifically with children in mind. WYES signed on April 1st, 1957, fulfilling the dream of a group of community activists dedicated to the mission of educational television. But for sheer longevity when it comes to children's TV, few can compare with this snowman turned pitchman who appeared every December on WDSU.
Hello, everybody, hello. I hope you will like our little show.
Jingle, jangle, jingle, here comes Mr. Bingle with another message from Kris Kringle. Time to launch the Christmas season. Maison Blanche makes Christmas pleasin'. Gifts galore for you and me, each a gem from A&B. That is inculcated in me. I heard it so many times.
Mr. Bingle was the brainchild of advertising managers at the old Maison Blanche department store. The man pulling his strings was puppeteer Oscar Eisentraut.
And I was Pete the Penguin, his sidekick. I don't know if I can do the voice anymore.
It used to be a voice like this. That's what you did. You said, "Hi, Bingo."
And we got paid very well. It used to take care of my insurance for my kids for the whole year. That was a show that really paid. And sometime Bingle was ill because he worked so hard. He did for the orphans during the Christmas holidays. He'd go and do shows, and he was out of it. And I'd have to do Bingo. I'll have to do, I would do this for, and then try to do bingo for. Of course, it was double money, so I did it.
As New Orleans kids were growing up during the 1960s and early 1970s, for many, this was must-see TV, New Orleans' version of American Bandstand, every Saturday afternoon on Channel 4. The show premiered in the late 1950s as Saturday Hop, but was later renamed in honor of a popular new host.
I was here 2 weeks, and Mike Early called me up to his office and he said, have you ever done a dance show before? Now, let me preface this. In television, in those days, you never said no. Yes, I've done a dance show before. Good, because, and this was on a Thursday, he said, good, because this Saturday you're doing Saturday Hop.
John Pila easily moved into his new role, and as the show's popularity grew, almost every teenager in town wanted to come on. But rules were rules.
You had to be at least 14 years of age, through senior in high school, and well, I even hate to say it now, but there was a height limit. you had to be able to pass a mark that we had on the door of the studio. We really didn't turn short people away, but we sort of, said to them, don't stay in the front too much. You'd be amazed at the number of confessions I've had made to me in later years. I bump into somebody who's 30-some years old. Say, I wasn't really 14, I was 12. Yeah, okay.
Writer David Cuthbert appeared on the show several times as a teenager and remembers the show's enormous popularity.
It was extraordinary. I mean, the kids would be lined up all the way down from the studio out into the office of Channel 4 and onto the street to get on. And the first kids to get there got to go on.
In addition to teenagers who earned a guest shot on the show, there were regular attractions, including performers from the Hazel Romano and later Tony Bevanetto dancing schools.
They were girls from Nichols and Forche, and they had the beehives and the white eyeshadow and the white lipstick, and it was just fabulously 60s. Short skirts, short skirts, but I think they had a rule about the shirts could only be so short. I think Pila had a yardstick there, or a ruler, to make sure that the skirts weren't too short. They didn't want to be accused of indecency.
The host himself admits he did have to keep a watchful eye on sometimes risque fashions and dancing fads.
In fact, somebody once said to me, I know how you manage the best ratings in New Orleans on Saturday. And I said, how? I said, every guy in a bar with a dirty white T-shirt and a beer in his hand is looking at those go-go dancers.
For anyone who grew up watching TV in the 1960s, these sounds and scenes say it all.
Hello, my dear followers of the Fantastic. Once again, my genius shall be put to a test before the entire scientific world.
There was only one place to be on Saturday nights back then, parked in front of the TV for a science lesson from a, shall we say, renowned scientific mind, that of Dr. Momus Alexander Morgus.
Success is only acquired through constant effort, and today we are going to connect our patient here to our artificial heart machine. Once he gets this heart connected to his body through this big tube over here, why, he'll be able to live to be about 200 years old. All right, sterilize. Oh, I got to get the glove on. Let's see here. Well, I don't need that one. All right. Take it away. Got to be sterile. Okay. Now, Chopley.
And Morgus was the biggest event in television for kids, you know, 9 to 13 and 14 that ever happened in TV.
Oh, don't be afraid, Chopley. Look, have I ever failed? Oh, don't be silly. I've never failed at anything.
We would watch it. We would have groups of kids over to watch it. You'd watch it, and in between commercial breaks, you'd call up everybody and say, wait, you see what he's doing this week? He's got the Instant People machine on.
Dr. Morgus first brought his talents to WWL-TV in 1959. The setting for the show? His lab above the old city ice house. There he updated viewers on his scientific exploits in between segments of horror movies. Always a part of the scientific formula, Chopsley, Morgus's Hulk of an assistant, who wore a hood as a result of some unfortunate plastic surgery performed by the master. There was also Eric, the preserved brain and skull of a former lab assistant, who watched over things in the laboratory and served as the doctor's perfect foil.
Isn't that right, Eric?
Yes, Master.
In 1961, Morgus hit the big screen with a full-length feature film, The Wacky World of Dr. Morgus. It was fitting, then, that he later welcomed movie and entertainment critic Al Shea into his lab.
It really is nice of you, Dr. Morgus, to let me come by here today to talk to you. So many of our midday viewers are really anxious to know what do you mind not standing so close?
Oh, I'm sorry.
What you really like.
Well, I got a lot of chemicals here, and of course I'm sorry about the place, but cleanliness is next to nothingness. I tell you, it's what you do that counts in this world.
After leaving the airwaves in the 1970s, Morgus made a TV comeback in 1987.
Good evening. Welcome to Morgus Presents.
His lab and his scientific methods looked much the same.
Oh, look busy. Well, good evening, my dear friends of science. Those who know the true meaning of the symbol.
After more than 40 years on television, even now the good doctor is still at it, as we see in this rare look behind the scenes inside his laboratory.
Are we on the air yet? Oh, hello there, my dear friends of science. Oh, am I happy to be a part of this historical TV documentary. After all, it was I, Morgus, who introduced the world's first live, unrehearsed reality program to television. That was back in the 1950s. Back then, Chet Morrison was the mayor. In fact, I brought such national recognition to New Orleans. He gave me the keys to this city. Of course, Mayor Skiro came in later and changed all the locks.
Talk to most of the people who helped launch the golden age of New Orleans television, and most will modestly say they were at the right place at the right time. But in reality, it's what they did with this new medium that sets them apart. The golden age begins in 1948, when TV itself becomes a reality here. That's the year WDSU becomes the city and state's first television station. The man behind it, Edgar Stern Jr., was the son of a wealthy family and looking for a job.
Actually, my dad and my mother wanted to launch me on a career. I had been trained in the Army as a radar maintenance officer. Never got to do it in actual life, but I was very well trained. And suddenly the idea of getting into the television business came up. And television technically was very much like radar, and from an engineering standpoint, I could understand it thoroughly.
That fascination with the technical side of TV would prove beneficial especially since Stern and his team would be building a TV station from scratch. Soon, a team of engineers would build a transmitter atop the Hibernia Bank building, then the tallest in town, and set up studios inside. Members of the crew, led by Chief Engineer Lindsay Riddle, truly were learning by doing.
Well, when the cameras came, Lindsay and Edgar said, okay, the cameras are in these crates, put them together, and I said, that's nice, except I have never even seen a television set. I'd never seen a television picture or anything else.
To help sell New Orleanians on this new thing called television, WDSU practiced producing TV shows. The D.H. Holmes department store was an early sponsor, and an advertising manager there hastily recruited a young radio personality named Terry Fletridge to pitch the product.
And I said, well, I've never seen television. He said, oh, nothing to it. I said, well, can't I at least take some time off and go to wherever they have it? I don't think they had it south of the Mason-Dixon line. And he said, no, there isn't time. There isn't time. You just put these programs together. Because, don't you know, he said, television's just radio with pictures. And I've never forgotten those magic words. Sometimes that's all it is.
If anyone can properly be called the first lady of local TV, it is Terry Fletridge. She was on the air here from day one and went on to contribute some of the local medium's most memorable moments. When WDSU signed on December 18, 1948, it did so as the 6th station in the South and the 48th in the United States. While TV was new, for many people, just being able to turn on the set and see a picture, no matter how primitive, was special.
While we had the transmitter ready to go, one night about 2 o'clock in the morning, we decided we'd put a picture on the air, and when we did, some lady called and she was out of breath. She could hardly talk. She received the picture on the little 10-inch screen that she had.
Before long, WDSU's program schedule filled up, with productions aired on location, like this one, Around the Town with Mr. Brown, sponsored by Brown's Velvet Dairy. It featured live music from Lenfant's restaurant. Other programs were broadcast from tiny studios at the Hibernia Bank. By the early 1950s, WDSU had outgrown its downtown digs and moved to the French Quarter, setting up shop in the historic Brulatour Mansion at 520 Royal Street. And by then, WDSU had built a stable of stars. Mel Levitt, a native of St. Louis who came to work at WDSU as a sports announcer, was among the brightest.
Hi, everybody. Top of the evening to you. Here's one for the books.
Mel was pure talent. No matter what he touched, what he did it well. He was an excellent writer. I thought one of the best writers in the city, whether he was writing for television or writing for print. He wrote beautifully. And then, of course, he had this great ability to present what he had written, and with feeling, with emotion, passion. A genius at television in coming up with ideas and presenting them to the public.
Channel 6 also served as the launching pad for the career of a soon-to-be major star. Dick Van Dyke hosted his own comedy show here in the 1950s.
And I started doing a daily show, 4 o'clock for an hour, with nothing, just me to start with, and I think we probably had a little trio. And besides that, I pulled an 8-hour shift as a staff announcer. And I did some new news, and I had a couple of record shows and things like that. But the little hour we did on television kind of began to catch on, and we began to get some kids coming in as an audience. And it got to be kind of a thing. I really enjoyed it.
For most of its first 10 years on the air, Channel 6 was the only station in town. For that reason, it was able to build a bond with viewers that would be hard to break. But the Jesuits of Loyola University were willing to try. In 1957, after building WWL radio into a nationally known operation, Loyola was ready to try television. These are photographs of WWL's first night on the air. broadcasting from the studios on North Rampart Street. In those early years, Channel 4 struggled a bit to find its footing, until someone new, labor lawyer J. Michael Early, took over the reins as general manager in 1961.
We're talking about the golden age of television. I think the golden age of television in New Orleans started the day Mike Early walked in the door. He was a labor lawyer, sure, but he was a very intelligent man, and he was determined not to let this station continue to become a purveyor of sitcoms.
My goal was to be number one. I've never settled for second in my life. I didn't know how long it would take us to get there, but I knew that this was my goal.
It's high noon in the Crescent City and time to catch up on the news with a lot of people on midday, 60 minutes of information and fun. Now, today's Index. 2 editions of the news and stories behind the news with Alec Gifford and Terry Fletridge. A news conference with a mayoralty candidate. A weekend weather report from the weather office of Nash Roberts. Community memos and music with Pete Lauderman. And fun with Wayne Mack and the ladies of the St. Claude Heights Mothers Club. Produced for you on midday by Terry Fletridge.
Hi, and may I wish you a perfectly beautiful day, another in a long string of lovely days.
From the 1950s through the 1970s, this Channel 6 news talk variety show was what many consider local programming at its best. Host and producer Terry Fletridge was Midday's biggest star, but not from the beginning. She originally wrote material for the program's predecessor, Our House, with host Vera Massey. What viewers didn't know was that Massey suffered from a debilitating illness and had to be carried on and off the set.
And then she left. I think maybe she needed to go back for treatment or whatever. And she left rather precipitously, so they hadn't found a replacement. And so they asked me, Louis Reed, whether I would take over. And again, you know, never done it. And he said, it's just for a little while, we'll get somebody else, we'll get someone from New York. Would you do it just for a little while? So I did. And interestingly enough, there was a rating period, and it went sky high, and so I got stuck in it.
Fletridge was stuck, and New Orleanians were hooked. She and the regular cast became local favorites.
Time now for the news, and for that, here's Alec Gifford. Alec?
Thank you, Terry. Good afternoon, everyone. The Orleans Parish Grand Jury says...
It was a news magazine show, but it was done in a very folksy way. Terry Fletridge would read magazine articles to you. She would have things off the top of her head. She would talk about topical things. She was very much topical.
Midday was definitely the first magazine show tailored after, because the Today Show was on, and it was tailored after that same format, always having the news, always having the weather, and then topics that were geared to the New Orleans area.
I guess it was like life with pictures. Well, news, important people in the news, celebrities, with a strong emphasis on writers, and a very strong emphasis on our city and our state, because I fell in love with it, and I still am.
Terry Fletridge's personal touch helped Midday draw big ratings during its heyday.
The show was so popular that people who were presidents of banks went home at noon to see the show and to see the newscast, and people in surrounding areas that in little towns outside of the New Orleans area would go home at noon to watch the Midday Show.
Announcer and co-host Wayne Mack, the man kids knew as the Great McNutt, entertained their mothers each day in the studio audience.
We had nice little tables with flowers and tablecloths, and different women's clubs and school clubs. There'd be maybe 20 ladies. And you know, that can get pretty boring, but not with Wayne.
Oh, nothing but blue skies. Hey, that's Pete. You got us off to a good start there, Pete. Welcome to the program. And also welcome to the St. Claude Heights Mothers Club today. Brought back by popular demand, They called us up and demanded that they be put back on the show.
Bless their hearts, I'm sure most of them have passed on now to the great midday show in the sky. But they used to get their hair done, get a hat, then a lot of them had to pay a babysitter, and then they'd park next door. So it cost them to come down here, and we'd serve them stale sandwiches and warm Pepsi-Cola. And they'd see me get the microphone and start around to talk to them, and a bunch of them would say, "Don't ask me nothing."
After working behind the scenes as a producer on Midday, Al Shea moved in front of the camera as entertainment critic and celebrity interviewer. For Midday, Shea also made annual trips to Hollywood, stargazing for the small screen audience. Two Midday regulars give him much of the credit for landing them a job in local television. In the early 1960s, Bob and Jan Carr were new to town and working for WWL Radio. It wasn't Midday, but a morning program, Second Cup, that helped launch their local TV career. At the time, the Channel 6 show was looking for two new hosts.
Oh, thank you, Al. If you haven't trick and treated in the French Quarter, you've got sort of a treat coming for you instead of a trick, because some of the old...
We really owe our career to Al Shea in broadcasting in New Orleans, because he's the one that first kind of identified us and said, hey, I think there may be an opportunity for you at Channel 6.
So he went up to see Mr. Louis Reed and Jerry Romick, and they said, yeah, fine, bring him over. So we did an audition and did a few commercials for him, and they fell in love with us, and they hired us on the spot.
They fell in love with us.
And so that was August of '61, if I remember right.
I'm Bob.
And I'm Jan, and we're the Cars.
Both legally and happily at home and
here on the magnificent roof of the Royal Orleans Hotel. Good morning now, thank you. We're here Monday through Friday, 9 to 9:30, up here on the roof of the Royal Orleans Hotel.
We're in New Orleans now, but we're natives of Cleveland, both.
But really, we call New Orleans our home, and we hope for a long, long time to come.
Back on the Midday set, segments in the kitchen were a staple. Helping to keep things moving was chef's assistant Marie Matthews, who had appeared on cooking shows on Channel 6 since the 1950s. On Midday, she served things up with the chef from Brennan's restaurant.
And he was a character because he could speak very little English, so you could hardly understand what he was saying. I hate to say this, bless his soul, he's dead and gone. But Chef Paul used to bring over brandy, liquor, and like vinegar bottles and things like that. And we had a stagehand. And that particular day, he just knew Paul had left some brandy in the bottle, and he turned the bottle up to his mouth, and it wound up to be vinegar. And I thought, oh, he nearly had a fit.
A fashion forecast in color as D.H. Holmes presents The International Look. American designs at home anywhere in the world. The International Look from Holmes, at home the world over. And the international choice in color this season from the Maharajas of India, Raja Red.
For local TV stations, staying on the air meant paying the bills. And that, of course, meant a word from the sponsor.
Walls and books, 1825, too late.
The commercials are in many ways as memorable as the programs themselves, and often just as creative.
Hello, Mellow Jack's little darling. You're the beer for me, yes sirree.
Some soon-to-be famous faces also pop up in classic local commercials. Here's actress Betty White selling coffee. And then there are the stars made famous just by their commercials. Commercial pitchman Dick Bruce worked as a staff announcer at Channel 6 for many years, but is much better known for his taste for Mackenzie's pastries.
Well, he would take a big piece of pie, and it would be like this, it would be a headshot, and he would go into that, go, that's good. We go, ooh, I'm gonna run away, you know. But it's so. That was Mackenzie. Mackenzie's hired him and hired him and hired him and hired him.
This is your SO Reporter with headlines of the world.
Presented by Esso's Standard Oil Company and your nearby Esso dealer.
Often the commercial content wasn't reserved for just the spots in between the programming.
Good evening, everyone. This is Alec Gifford reporting.
But here's the interesting thing about that as compared to what happens today. The Esso newscast was controlled by Esso. Esso insisted on the number of stories that are in the newscast, on the type of stories that were in the newscast. Much as we hate to admit that, it was sponsor control of the newscast. People say, ask today, does the sponsor control the newscast? No, they do not. They simply buy time in that newscast and they get what they pay for.
Alec Gifford joined WDSU in 1955, just as the station's first news director, Bill Monroe, was slowly building the newsroom. Monroe went to work for the station after leaving the Item newspaper.
So I went over there to see if there was an opening for a news director. I had done some radio, but nobody in those days had done any television. Television was brand new. So I took over the job as news director of a new television station without any television experience, the kind of things that happened in those days.
I mean, it was a golden age, but really in a sense it was a stone age of television. I hate to say that, but we had no idea what we were doing. We had no idea, how to do television news, how to cover it and so forth. So we really were kind of in a stone age than a golden age.
Across town, WWL was also building its newsroom. One of Channel 4's early stars, retired anchor and reporter Bill Elder, came to Channel 4 in 1966.
Representing the entire staff here at WWL, I'm Bill Elder.
He was a man who was born to be in the news department, just born to be a newsman, and was great and fearless. I mean, he had people threatening him and going to beat him up and everything else, and didn't matter. He was going to get that story. Always got it. Always got the story.
Phil Johnson, the man who would go on to call the shots as Channel 4's news director, actually joined WWL as promotion director in 1960.
I was recommended to go to Channel 4. They were looking for a promotion man. And I went and talked to the general manager, and he said, "What have you promoted lately?" I said, "Mostly me." And he said, "That's good enough for me," and he hired me.
Oh, we need the river, the port, and tourism, but we need more, so very much more, if this city is to grow and thrive.
Johnson found his niche in the news department just as Channel 4 was finding its footing in the competition for local news viewers, with a commitment to traveling the globe to cover news stories. That was clear when the station traveled to Rome for a documentary on the Second Vatican Council.
Then we went to Vietnam. Did a 90-minute documentary on the war in Vietnam, and mostly through the eyes of New Orleanians who were in Vietnam.
We're talking to a sergeant named Donner in South Vietnam, and you've got to know that all the Donners come from Algiers. Is that right, Sergeant?
That's correct.
One hard-nosed newsman found a niche in New Orleans TV toward the end of his career. Jim Metcalf had covered news here throughout the 60s and 70s, but was burning out at Channel 4.
He hated going out on assignments where people would die and there were fires and there was blood and gore. Hated it. He did it. And then, as he neared his 50th birthday, he had an illness. When he came back, Phil Johnson said, do some feature stuff.
I could see that he had talent. He could write. My God, he could write.
This is Jim Metcalf.
He said, well, I'm a pretty good feature man. I said, fine. Give me 3 features a week. He wound up with the Sunday Journal. He did his own half hour every Sunday, 9:30 to 10. Beat the network competition. Amazing.
Once again, we are betrayed, the words and I, faced with a challenge we cannot overcome. We cannot translate the quiet splendor of a flower into symbols set on paper.
And it became so distinctive, and what he did became so distinctive, he won the Peabody Award. So in the last 2-3 years of Jim Metcalf's life, when most guys are being kicked out of the news business, you know, all these young guys are coming in, and here he was in his 50s, he got to do what he wanted to do. He got to do who he was. He said, for the first time, I was able to communicate.
And now we would thank you for being with us and would bid you good night.
Another Sunday night feature helped introduce New Orleans viewers to the wonders of color television. Shades of New Orleans presented photo essays in color and often set to music. The series was hosted for many years by Leo Willette.
Leo was a staff announcer on Channel 4, and he said the first image that was ever broadcast was of his face. He said, when they broke the color cameras out of the crates at Channel 4, I was the guy they did the skin tests with, the color tests with. And the first time you saw a color image was Shades of New Orleans.
This has been another in the many Shades of New Orleans.
Now, tonight's editorial. Here is John Corporon.
Mothers and fathers of New Orleans, you may have concluded...
For some local stations, their bond with the community was strengthened by the stance they took on issues affecting New Orleans through daily editorials. At Channel 6, that job went first to Bill Monroe and later news director John Corporon. Editorials were also delivered by station executive Jerry Romig, who began his career in the newsroom at Channel 6.
The idea of our doing an editorial mainly was to give the community another voice. The item had gone out of business. The state's item had ceased to publish, and that left only the morning paper with an editorial voice for the city. Mr. Stern and Bill Monroe both had this strong feeling that the city was just too big to be a one editorial voice town.
Good evening.
Soon, New Orleans had another daily editorial. Phil Johnson would help WWL-TV find its editorial voice in 1962 at the urging of General Manager Mike Early.
Well, the Jesuits let him know that they expected the station to stand for something. And he figured that, well, if you're going to stand for something, we'll let you know, and started the editorial. I got the copy of the first editorial. And it's pretty much lays down the rules of what we're going to do. Good evening, I said, which I said for 37 years. Today a new voice speaks out in New Orleans, the voice that of this station, WWL-TV. My name is Phil Johnson. Beginning today and every weekday thereafter, this station will present editorial opinion, a living, vigorous commentary on all things pertaining to New Orleans, its people, and its future.
And next, the Channel 6 editorial cartoon by Chase.
An innovation across town at WDSU involved someone who had been expressing his opinion for years, on paper, John Churchill Chase.
Faces can tell the story of other matters of importance going on today. Khrushchev is again threatening, this time his communist colleague. He stares daggers at Mao. Tomorrow, Goldwater brings a campaign for president to the city. His visit poses a problem for Skiro, who would like to be a good host and remain a good Democrat. But for New Orleans tonight, 4 young visitors from England seem to top the news.
John was the editorial cartoonist for the state's item, and it was a Bill Monroe idea. Again, creativity. First time ever in America, an editorial cartoonist. We had the editorial. Now here was an opportunity to supplement that editorial with a cartoon. Most of the times, his cartoon blended in with the written, spoken editorial.
This portion of today's Midday is brought to you by Bosco, a handy jar of Bosco as mother's best friend. Now to the weather office of Nash Roberts.
Hi there. This is the way the weekend map looks. This is the high-pressure system that dropped down behind the cold front that came through yesterday morning.
He knew how to use the marks a lot, that's for sure. He could present the weather very simply, but very clearly, and rarely was he wrong. Rarely.
You're looking for the man. He's the man.
Our winds would go from northeast and finally around to east.
For over 50 years, Nash Roberts was the man New Orleanians turned to for the lowdown on Louisiana's weather. And that's with good reason. He had been on their TV sets almost from the beginning, having worked for 3 stations in town, beginning with a freelance job on Channel 6, tracking a hurricane. But Roberts never thought a TV career would follow.
We did a demonstration, a demo with me down in the studio actually doing a show, and they upstairs at 6, up in the heavens there somewhere, they were viewing this thing. See? Well, when I finished, we took the elevator and went upstairs, and they were all sitting around in the audition room. They said, oh, you know, how do you like it? Well, he said, would you object to a 13-week exclusion? I said, for what? They said, because if it doesn't work, we want to be out of it for 13 weeks. I said, it won't last 13 days. I said, I'll be glad to let you sign an exclusion for 13 weeks. And of course, that's the first really bad forecast I made. It went from nothing to years.
While Roberts became known as the hurricane expert, he was just one of New Orleans' many memorable weathermen. Nash's brother Ep Roberts joined him at Channel 6 on morning weather reports. Over at Channel 4, Al Duckworth guided viewers through Hurricane Camille and its aftermath. Weathercaster Don Westbrook was a fixture on WWL's newscast almost from the beginning. Originally one of a handful of staff announcers whose voice accompanied most every commercial and station break, Westbrook earned his stripes as a weathercaster who could communicate. Magnificent might be the most fitting way to describe the work of a TV personality who moonlighted as a weathercaster in the 1960s.
I'm going to call these people, oh, excuse me, here's the people. I was going to call a television station here. They're running a little late here. You know, I'm a busy scientist. I can't play around with these waiting around here, holding up for some television station to pick up my scientific weather show. You know, I mean, I got to make money here. I got all...
For many people in New Orleans in the 1960s, Hap Glaudes was the first name in TV sports.
Go ahead, Hap. What have you got today?
Well, we got a lot of sports, of course. That's what that's what I'm doing, right? Sports. You wouldn't expect me to give a consumer report, would you, Bob?
No.
A native New Orleanian, Hap spoke like one, and as Channel 4's sports anchor, called things like he saw them. His sportscasts were unlike what most fans had ever seen or heard before.
We're going to let you take a look at some action from the 2 games yesterday in the professional playoffs, the Minnesota, what victories was it? We'll take a look at it. I won't tell you.
Channel 6's sports director in the 1960s, Wayne Mack, took over the anchor chair once held by Mel Levitt. But for many years before sitting behind the sports desk each day, he performed another role.
And I thought only in New Orleans could you do a kid show in boots and a wig and, you know, at 4 o'clock, and then at 4:30 change into a suit and tie and go on the set and do a sports show. If you tried that anywhere else in the country, they'd laugh you off the set. But in New Orleans, we got away with it, fortunately.
For TV personalities in New Orleans, there was a key assignment from day one, covering Carnival. For WDSU, that meant staking out a spot on the station's Royal Street balcony. At the time, the parades rolled through the French Quarter.
We put cameras on the second floor balcony on Royal Street. We put one on the balcony and one on the ground level in front of 520 Royal Street where the studios were. So the parades passed directly in front of our cameras and very, very close to our cameras.
For many years, Channel 6 anchor Mel Levitt provided the nightly commentary for the parades.
And now, coming into view, float number 7, Roses. And Comus here is vying, I believe, with Omar Khayyam and carrying through his theme of coupling poetry with visual presentation tonight. The quote from Omar Khayyam...
New Orleans viewers also took part in a true local TV tradition each Mardi Gras, staying up late to watch the conclusion of Carnival, as WDSU televised the meeting of the courts of Rex and Comus. The broadcast's most famous announcer was Channel 6 chief announcer Gay Batson.
For the 20th consecutive year, it is my pleasure to be your host for WDSU Television. I am Gay Batson, and with me is Ann Merrick. The first formal visit took place during the carnival season of 1882, and since that time, it has been an established custom.
He was the voice of carnival, you know, if you didn't go to sleep listening to him.
But it got so when he was doing this meeting of the courts that the script was exactly the same for about, I don't think it ever changed. So people began to memorize certain phrases that Gay would use, like he would say, "The Queen of Comus resumes her position alongside the King of Rex." And people would memorize those phrases, and sing them along with Gay when he was talking.
And now it's time for Eyewitness News, the South's most complete and up-to-the-minute coverage of local, national, and world news.
Good evening, I'm Ron Hunter. In the news...
By the early 1970s, the baby boomers who were born with television were growing up, and the stations they watched as children were changing too. The call letters of one station, WWOM, stood for Wonderful World of Movies. It later became WGNO, Channel 26. There was also WVUE, which for technical reasons had moved all over the dial since the day it signed on in 1953 as a UHF station. In 1970, WVUE swapped channel positions with WYES. 12 became 8, and vice versa. To promote the big switch, WVUE invited viewers to watch the first half of a movie, The Naked Jungle, on Channel 12. The second half on the new Channel 8.
They're headed this way, all right.
With WDSU facing the competition and changes to the industry, Edgar Stern was ready to sell off the station. In 1972, the Cosmos Broadcasting Company of Columbia, South Carolina, bought the station.
It's happened so much since then. You get somebody from out of the country, out of the state, to take over, and they don't have the New Orleans, Louisiana mystique. They don't understand any of this. And so they don't have a soul. And so everything that had color and vigor and soul and interest, it was all goodbye, Charlie.
Tragedy with a capital T. We were told that they were good operators, but they were heavily bottom line oriented.
The sale of Channel 6 to out-of-town owners mirrored what was happening to stations across the country. Here, new management drove away some of Channel 6's biggest stars. And as their favorites there changed, viewers began switching channels, most noticeably to WWL.
We were building all along, and all of a sudden there we were, number one. And the good thing about it was that it was number one for 4 decades, for 40 years, and still number one. And that's good. That's how you want to build. You don't want to be a flash in the pan.
While many of the faces may have changed, the success stories on the New Orleans TV dial are still about longevity, personality, and originality. And in the mind of one longtime viewer and critic, that includes being able to have fun in the process.
Oh, boy. Good Lipton tea. I'm trying to get his sponsor.
After tonight, you may
Yeah, I'll just take
Now
this
listen.
sponsor myself.
Yeah, well, fine. Enjoy yourself.
They had fun back then, and it shows. It shows in some of the tapes that remain. It shows in the memories of the people. It shows in the memories of the people who watched them. You had fun with those people.
Well, I think probably that was the most exciting thing about it. Yes, because we didn't see it, we didn't know what it was. So we really had to crawl into whatever ingenuity, intuitiveness, imagination, whatever that we had. And so we did our damnedest. And I guess it wasn't too bad. Because as I think about what we did, some of it is about as good as it gets.
But I remember my father watched the fights all the time, and they were sponsored by Pabst Blue Ribbon. And my brother Michael and myself, we would not drink milk unless it was in a beer glass, one of those cylindrical beer glass things. My mother was very indulgent, got us beer glasses. My grandmother was horrified. That'll teach those children to drink beer. She said, it's milk, Mother, you know.
As she's wont to do, she would start first.
Yeah, and I would say, this is Jan.
And this is Bob, and we would like to talk about Louisiana coffee because we think it's so wonderful.
And then he would say, no, that doesn't sound right. That doesn't
So
sound
all
right.
of a sudden, we were getting frustrated, and I said, well, let's just get on with it. This is Bob.
And this is Jan.
For Louisiana.
And Peter said, that's it. So that's how.
So this is Bob, and this is Jan for Louisiana, and that's it. That's it. It's done.
All I remember is my husband said, we're not going to have this at our house. I don't want our kids watching this. We didn't get a TV set for a year after we went on the air. So that's the reaction.
Went into the studio, and they said, stand here on this piece of tape, and there's the camera, and go ahead and do your thing. And I looked at the camera, and my first thought was, you know, I could be standing in my kitchen talking to the refrigerator. And I think that sustained me all the years. I was never frightened of a camera. I thought it was silly. I mean, what, send pictures through the air? I mean, come on.
Magic mirror, tell me today, did my friends at home have fun at play? I see Dominic, and I see Dana, and I see Bill and Jimmy and Susie. I see all my good friends, and I'll see you tomorrow morning bright and early in the Romper Room School. Bye now.
Well, what else can I say? Good evening.